Thank you, Joe. Magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. Thank you for joining today's activity. And I'll just share my screen, Joe.
Enabled na po.
Thank you.
Clear na din po, sir. Kita po.
Okay. Again, magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. I'll be presenting to you today the basic science of climate change, the issues related to it, and the policies that we are using when addressing climate change as a country. So the outline of the presentation would be first introduction of the issue of climate change. What are the impacts? What are the gases that we are looking at when we say we're addressing climate change? And we'll look at the IPCC special report and its implications to us. How do we make sure that this report is actually referred to with our in our plans? And then we'll look at the climate change outlook for the Philippines. Ano ba yung impacts na nakikita natin na dala ng climate change? How do we address it? Through adaptation and mitigation, and we'll give an overview of the CCC and its activities and the other related policies concerning climate change and our core or communities for resilience program. So let's start. So the science paints a clear picture. Climate change is happening, and greenhouse gas emissions from cars, coal-fired power plants, and other man-made sources, rather than the natural variations in climate, are the primary cause of climate change. Carbon dioxide, or CO2, and other greenhouse gases have always been present in the atmosphere, keeping the Earth hospitable to life by trapping heat. The heat coming from the sunlight is trapped in the atmosphere to keep our planet warm. Excess heat then is radiated back into the atmosphere, into space, and this process is called the natural greenhouse effect. But due to industrial revolution, emissions of these gases from human activities have accumulated steadily, trapping more heat. The continuous combustion of fossil fuel increases the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, resulting in what we call an enhanced greenhouse effect, which gradually pushes the planet's climate system into uncharted territory. Now, what is climate change? Climate change is defined by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change as a change in climate attributed directly or indirectly to human activities, which alters the composition of the global atmosphere, which is in addition to natural climate variability observed over comparable time periods. So dalawang factors yung tinitingnan natin dito. Una, yung human activity, which produces more carbon emissions, and yung tinatawag nating natural climate variability, because scientists have agreed through their data that talagang pabago-bago yung temperatura ng planeta natin. There are times when na mataas yung temperatura, bumababa, tumataas, bumababa. So ito yung tinatawag nating natural climate variability. So talagang pabago-bago yung temperatura ng planeta natin. Now, according to NASA, it is also defined as the usual weather found in a place. This could be a change in how much rain a place usually gets in a year. So kung pwede ding magbago yung temperatura ng lugar na yon for a month or a season. So ano ba yung impacts ng climate change? We have four major impacts of climate change. We have increase in temperature, sea level rise, change in precipitation, and extreme weather event. And we'll look at them closely one by one. Nabanggit kanina ni Commissioner Doral yung increase in temperature as mentioned by NASA. So this is to further illustrate that climate is actually changing through this video. So yung mga areas na blue, yung malalamig, and then those that are yellow and orange and ultimately red, ayun yung mga areas na may init. Ayan. So, ayun yung na-mention kanina ni Commissioner Dural na ayon sa NASA, mas tumitindi na yung init and actually, sabi nga ni Commissioner kanina, 2020 tied with 2016 as the warmest year on record. This is despite yung reduced economic activity last year because of the pandemic. And in addition to that, supposedly meron pang cooling effect yung La Nina up until April this year. So despite these factors, 2020 is still tied as the warmest year on record in 2016. So the next impact that we'll be looking at is sea level rise. Among the most serious and potentially catastrophic effects of global warming is sea level rise, caused by a combination of melting glaciers all over the world and what we call thermal expansion of the seas as the oceans warm. Higher sea levels will pose new and serious challenges for coastal communities, which is marami sa atin bilang isang archipelagic nation. In a study conducted by the University of the Philippines, Los Baños, or UPLB, kung magkakaroon ng 1 meter sea level rise, the Philippines will lose 167,290 hectares of seashore land. That will be affecting 171 coastal towns from 10 provinces, one of which is some of which are Iloilo and Capiz in Panay Island. And on top of that land loss, there will be economic losses as well as coastal businesses may close. No? There will be also displaced population because kapag tumaas yung tubig, there's a need to relocate those who are living near the ocean, and those people will be needing government support, which will also entail monetary resources. Yeah. Next impact is change in precipitation. Our weather patterns or our weather impacts from climate change include changes in precipitation patterns. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, future changes in weather patterns will affect different regions in different ways. Precipitation will further increase in high latitude regions of the world in summer, while other regions may experience consistent declines in rainfall. As a result of these changes, agriculture in developing countries such as the Philippines will be especially at risk. Next impact is extreme weather events. As global temperature continue to increase, the Earth's water cycle intensifies even more. Moisture from air temperature comes from a more intense water cycle that pulls more moisture from our ocean. And this intensified water cycle can lead to stronger typhoons, causing flooding among other impacts during a heavy downpour. So sino ba makakalimot nung 2013 when Typhoon Yolanda ravaged our country? And then in 2020, we had 3 successive typhoons, Typhoon Skinta, Super Typhoon Rolly, and Typhoon Ulysses, which caused damages in infrastructure and agriculture sector and claimed lives of our countrymen. The same heat that evaporates more water from the ocean, causing bigger downpours and floods, pulls moisture even more quickly from the soil. Kaya mas matindi yung nararanasan nating drought ngayon. So sino ba yung makakalimot din nung nagkaroon tayo ng prolonged drought or yung El Niño experience sa Mindanao noong 2019. May maraming naging impacts yung drought na to, even up to the social context, because when resources are scarce, there would be other impacts din sa society natin. Okay? So pagdating sa climate change, mayroon tayong 7 greenhouse gases na binabantayan. So ito yung carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, methane, and then perfluorocarbon, sulfur hexafluoride, and hydrofluorocarbon. Sorry, 6 types of greenhouse gases. Nung ginawa po natin yung ating National Greenhouse Gas Inventory for the second National Communication in 2000, we were able to quantify how much we are emitting and kung saan nagbumula yung mga emissions na to. Majority po ng emissions natin come from the energy and transportation sector, followed by agriculture, then by waste, and from the industry sector. It is noteworthy to mention that if we are able to segregate waste at source, recycle, and properly manage the disposal of our wastes, we can further reduce our emissions from the waste sector. So ito naman yung sources ng carbon dioxide. We have deforestation. Kaya crucial na mapangalagaan natin yung ating kagubatan so that the carbon dioxide trapped within or sequestered by the trees would remain in our forest. And then transportation, because the source din po yan ng carbon dioxide emissions. And then energy generation. For methane, ang sources naman niya is livestock raising, yung paggamit po natin ng pesticide and fertilizers, and again, yung wastes. For nitrous oxide, ang sources naman niya ay natural vegetation, fossil fuel combustion, and industrial processes. For hydrofluorocarbons, usually pinagagalingan po nito ay refrigerants, which we use for our air conditioning systems and sa ating mga refrigerators, either industrial or household level. The major sources of sulfur hexafluoride also include leakage from electrical switchgear, from magnesium smelting processes, and use in semiconductor manufacture. Puntahan naman po natin yung ating pong IPCC Special Report. After nations ratify the Paris Agreement, a landmark environmental accord was adopted by nearly every nation in 2015 to address climate change and to limit global warming to well below 2 degrees Celsius and pursue efforts to further limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. This can be done if the developed countries will drastically cut their carbon dioxide emissions and pledge to provide aid. That's financial and technological aid to developing countries. The IPCC, or the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, was invited to produce a special report on the impacts of climate change that we might see if global warming reaches 1.5 degrees Celsius or worse, yung pong 2 degrees Celsius increase. Ayon po sa kanilang report, we are already experiencing 1 degree Celsius above the pre-industrial climate benchmark. Anything beyond 1.5, even half a degree of warming, will significantly worsen the risks of flooding, extreme heat, drought, and poverty for our communities. Unfortunately, the IPCC report also suggested that we no longer have the luxury of time. Reducing this amount of emissions will need the exponential scaling up of renewable energy systems, energy efficiency, electrification of transport systems, and improvements of industrial and building efficiency on a global scale. However, yung pong commitments that we have right now and current climate actions are still inadequate to achieve the 1.5 Paris Agreement goal. Global warming is likely to reach 1.5 degrees Celsius between 2030 and 2050. Right now we're 2021, and current emission reduction commitments will still lead us to a staggering 3 degrees Celsius level of warming. But that's by 2100. The whole world, especially the developed and industrial countries, will need to enhance their mitigation targets and even more to keep climate change within relatively safe limits. So why do we need to talk about climate change in the Philippines? Asia is the most populated region in the world according to the latest numbers of World Worldometers, and the Philippines ranked 7th among Asian countries with the highest population. The country has been the face of climate risk and vulnerability, even made more pronounced by the tragedy and devastation brought about by Typhoon Nondoy in 2009, which prompted the passage of Climate Change Act 2009 and created the CCC and the Super Typhoon Yolanda in 2013. Sea level has risen in some parts of the country by nearly double the global average rate from 1993 to 2015. Worse, the State Weather Bureau projected that sea level rise in the country will increase by 20 centimeters under a high emission scenario, which might worsen storm surge hazard. So mas nalagay po sa panganib yung ating coastal communities. And when we say coastal communities, we're particularly identifying 64 coastal provinces from with 822 coastal communities with 25 major coastal cities, housing 60% of all LGUs, affecting 13.6 million Filipinos needing relocation. And if there's a need to relocate, definitely, as mentioned earlier, there would be the need for financial resources for this. Kasi hindi lang housing, hindi lang yung physical relocation nila yung kailangang bigyang pansin, pati yung economic aspect nun. Kasi yung trabaho nila, yung kailangan ding bigyan ng pansin. Next, the major rainfall changes and patterns in distribution. Increasing trends in annual and seasonal rainfall were observed in many parts of the country. Such trends were found to be associated with extreme rainfall events. Multimodal projections suggest a range of increase and decrease in seasonal mean rainfall exceeding 40% of its historical values. Nevertheless, the multimodal central estimate of projected changes in rainfall could be within the natural rainfall variations, except for the projected rainfall reduction over central sections of Mindanao that are beyond the observed rainfall variations in the past. Ibig sabihin po nun, while some parts of the country might receive rain, might have an increased precipitation sa panahon po ng tag-ulan, yung some parts of Mindanao will actually have reduced rainfall. And this is crucial to look at because Mindanao is dependent on hydropowered energy. And if there would be a reduced amount of rainfall in that area, pwede maapektuhan yung kanilang power generation. And we know that if power supply is affected, apektado din yung economic activity in a particular area. Next, threats to natural ecosystems. Approximately 1 million hectares of grassland in the Philippines are highly vulnerable to climate change in the future. Most grasslands in the uplands are prone to fires, particularly during extended periods of dryness and lack of rainfall during summer months. Next is dying corals. The 2016 Low Carbon Monitor report foresees that 98% of coral reefs in Southeast Asia will die by 2050, practically an extinction by the end of the century if current global warming trends will continue. The IPCC projects that by the years 2051 to 2060, the maximum fish catch potential of the Philippine seas will decrease by as much as 50% compared to 2000 to 2010 levels. So again, since our corals is crucial para po sa fish yield natin, if this would be affected, economic activity of coastal communities and our food supply will also be affected. Declining rice yields. Yeah, an analysis of temperature trends and irrigated field experiments at the International Rice Research Institute shows that grain yield decreased by at least 10% for each 1 degree Celsius increase in growing season minimum temperature in the dry season. So kung mas iinit pa ang inaasahan nating temperatura, mas bababa yung dami ng nakukuha nating ani mula sa ating agriculture sector. Tropical cyclones. The successive typhoons in October and November 2020 alone resulted in approximately $850 million in losses and damages in agriculture and infrastructure. In the energy sector, Super Typhoon Goni or Rolly alone destroyed $56.3 million worth of infrastructure in 25 provinces in the country. So kung mas marami pong tropical cyclones ang inaasahan natin, we're also expecting heavier loss and damages brought about by these extreme weather events. Pagdating naman po sa water supply, the World Health Organization stated that climate-sensitive and gender-specific health impacts affects women disproportionately than men, such as droughts, floods, and storms. And a paper released by the World Health Organization examining gender, climate change, and health stated that the impacts of natural hazards, such as droughts, floods, and storms, kill more women than men and tend to kill women at a younger age. Climate-sensitive and gender-specific health impacts affect women disproportionately than men. So, kailangan pong bantayan din itong impacts na to so we can develop programs that would address this concern. So primarily, how do we address these impacts? We have two approaches. We have climate change adaptation and mitigation. Countries in the tropics and southern hemisphere are projected to experience the largest impacts on economic growth due to climate change, including the Philippines. And in these trying times, we should focus on two areas, adaptation and mitigation, and have these translated and inculcated in our climate policies and programs. Climate change is a real problem, but it also has real solutions. Some of its effects are already inevitable and will require some degree of adaptation. To avoid the worst effects, scientists say we will need to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere. That means reducing emissions or mitigation. And just to clarify, mitigation in the context of climate change refers to human intervention to address anthropogenic emissions or yung man-made emissions and sources by removals by sinks of all greenhouse gases, including ozone-depleting substances and their substitutes. So magkaiba po yung disaster risk mitigation and climate change mitigation. Disaster risk mitigation is more aligned with climate change adaptation. When we say climate change mitigation, it refers to either limiting or limiting our greenhouse gases or increasing our carbon sinks, which is our forests and our ocean. Our country po is considered a pioneer in climate change and disaster reduction management laws and policies. The Climate Change Act of 2009 and the People's Survival Fund Law, the Renewable Energy Act of 2008, and the Green Jobs Act of 2016, among others. And may we also share with you, ano-ano ba yung mga na-establish nating policies before? So, unang-una po dito, when we established our interagency Committee on Climate Change in 1991. This was even before the Rio Summit in 1992. And then when we signed, we also had we also signed the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1994. We first had our greenhouse gas inventory also in 1994. And in 1996 up until 2000, doon po natin ginawa yung ating first Philippine National Communication. This is a report that we submit to the UNFCCC as a party to that convention. And in 2003, we signed the Kyoto Protocol, which is a binding document stating that parties should be limiting their carbon emissions with a particular amount and noting that this climate change is actually brought about by human activities. So tayo din po ay party or signatory sa Kyoto Protocol. In 2006 to 2010, ito naman po iba pa nating policies na labas as a nation. In 2006, we had the Biofuels Act. And then in 2007, we established the Presidential Task Force on Climate Change. And then in 2008, we had the Proclamation on Global Warming and Climate Change, which we observe every November 19 to 25. Ito po yung ating National Global Warming and Climate Change Consciousness Week. And then in the same year, we also had the Renewable Energy Act. And the Climate Change Act followed in 2009. Ito po yung nag-establish ng CCC. And then, as a primary deliverable of the Commission, in 2010, we have developed po the National Framework Strategy on Climate Change. This identifies the variables that we need to consider pagdating po sa pag-develop ng ating National Climate Change Action Plan. And in 2010, we had the Philippine Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Act, and then we also had the Philippine Strategy on Climate Change Adaptation. From 2011 to 2015, ito na po na-adapt na po yung ating National Climate Change Action Plan in 2011. We had EO43, which is yung pagpuputol po ng mga puno, pinatigil. And then we had yung pong People Survival Fund or the Public Act 10174 in 2012. And then we integrated DRR and CCA pagdating po sa ating Environmental Impact Assessment System in 2012. 2013, ito po na simula ng ating budget tagging exercise through CCC-DBM Joint Memorandum Circular 2013-01. And then in 2014, we submitted our second national communication, which is an updated inventory of our greenhouse gas emissions. Again, this is as a party to the UNFCCC. And then in 2014, naglabas din na po ng Executive Order 174, institutionalizing our greenhouse gas inventory reporting system as a nation. Dito po in-identify natin ano ba mga agencies ang naka-assign na mag-provide ng data for specific sectors so that we can more effectively compute our greenhouse gas emissions. And this is also institutionalized the greenhouse gas inventory within our government offices para mas kumbaga mas capacitated na rin yung ating government in conducting our greenhouse gas inventory. Previously po kasi, before this policy, we collaborated with consultants in developing our greenhouse gas inventory. With this policy, we institutionalized the development of the report in different government offices. And then in 2015, in Presidential Proclamation 1160, declaring November 25 as the National Day for Youth in Climate Action, further engaging other sectors pagdating po sa climate action, specifically for this proclamation, the youth sector. And in 2015, we submitted to the UNFCCC yung pong ating intended nationally determined contribution. And from 2016 up until now, we had the National Policy Review on Energy, looking at ano ba yung cheapest form of energy. When we say cheapest, not just yung financial cost of putting up the energy source, but also looking at ano ba yung impacts nun sa community. So hindi lang siya financial concerns, but even health concerns, environmental concerns with the energy sources that we are using. And in April 22, 2016, we signed the Paris Agreement that makes us a party to the Paris Agreement. And then in 2016, we also had the Philippine Green Jobs Act. So this would incentivize the private sector in coming up with livelihood opportunities that actually benefit the environment. At the same time, integrating sustainability actions and policies sa kanilang business operations. At the same time, it also paved the way for the Department of Labor and Employment to be part of the advisory board of the Commission. And then in 2017, February 28, President Rodrigo Duterte signed the instrument of accession for the ratification of the Paris Agreement in March 2017. Na-approve na po yung resolution na yun, so we can be a party to the Paris Agreement. And on 2017, April 22, we officially became a party to the Paris Agreement. And then in 2019, that's Republic Act 11285. And then House Resolution number 535, last November 24, 2020. Ito po yung ating resolution ng lower house declaring for climate emergency. And then by February this year, we are to submit our nationally determined contribution to the UNFCCC, and we'll discuss that furthermore later on. And since the establishment of the CCC, it has worked hard to breathe life into the law that created it. We led the development of the NFSCC and the NCCAP, which are currently updating. And this document, the NCCAP, outlines the country's climate change adaptation and mitigation agenda from 2011 to 2028. One of our major programs for capacity building of local government units, national government agencies, and higher education institutions is the Communities for Resilience program. Given our mandate and mission under the law, the Commission has focused its capacity building services on supporting the LGUs through convergence of efforts with relevant national government agencies, institutions, civil society, and development partners. Our flagship capacity building program, the CORE or Communities for Resilience, is one whole of government and society approach to fostering such synergistic actions across the development agendas of key sectors and the government at the national and local level. The core endeavors to build the capacities of local government units through higher educational institutions and state universities and colleges as mentors and facilitators in enhancing the knowledge of the local government officials and planning officers on climate change adaptation and mitigation and disaster risk assessment. And we are also partnering with other government agencies with this, and some of those agencies are actually your mother organizations for mother offices. Under the Communities for Resilience program, faculty members from higher education institutions across the country have been trained as trainers using the core modules. Right now, we're prioritizing the capacity building for risk science-based local planning using the 5 modules, yung climate and disaster risk assessment, greenhouse gas inventory, enhanced LCCAP formulation implementation, climate change expenditure tagging, which is the focus of our activity today and tomorrow, and the People Survival Fund access. Now, the nationally determined contributions, in light of the very eminent threat posed by the changing climate, the government of the Philippines, led by the Climate Change Commission, pursuant to its mandate under the law, has put in place policies that will facilitate our country's transition to a greener economy while ensuring a just transition that maximizes beneficial outcomes for all sectors of society. This includes the finalization of our first nationally determined contributions, or NDC, which will define our pathway for low carbon development consistent with the 1.5 degrees Paris goal and our national aspirations. Since 2016, employing a whole of government and society approach, the CCC has initiated 10 sectoral stakeholder consultations, 7 focus group discussions, 6 roundtable discussions on the NDC, 9 cost-benefit analysis consultations, 5 civil society organizations consultations, and 3 public consultations to ensure that the NDC is firmly grounded on scientific and technical considerations while recognizing the critical processes necessary for the development of our NDC. Computational capacity building, such as the greenhouse gas inventory, greenhouse gas inventory quality assurance workshop for greenhouse gas baseline setting for lead sector agencies, and technical roundtable discussions on the finalization of the 2010 greenhouse gas inventory were also facilitated, and 5 sectoral business summits were held by the CCC to capture the inputs of the business sector. This is our way to sustain interaction between and among national government agencies and stakeholders, and allow key partners to claim ownership of the NDC to the broadest possible extent and with increased collective ambition. A consensus among lead government agencies and key stakeholders on the NDC ambition has emerged from the continuing consultations. The Philippines will commit a total projected greenhouse gas emission reduction and avoidance of 75%, representing the country's ambition for greenhouse gas mitigation for the period 2020 to 2030. Of that 75%, 2.71% is unconditional, while 72.29% is conditional. When we say unconditional, we will do it on our own. If it's conditional, we'll be needing the assistance of other nations, such as for finance, technology transfer, capacity building. This NDC ambition is higher than the intended nationally determined contribution, or INDC, that we submitted in 2015. The higher ambition was advanced by the lead sector agencies of the government, specifically, specifically the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, Department of Transportation, and the Department of Energy, as well as the National Economic and Development Authority for the process of economic modeling. The first NDC is still in the process of finalization before its submission to Finance Secretary Carlos Dominguez III and to President Rodrigo Roa Duterte before transmittal to the United Nations Climate Change Secretariat. So that's the end of the presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much,